1992 was the end of an era, but there wasn't much of a rose-throwing curtain call. Instead, the seedy underbelly of an overgrown carny product had been exposed to the public. Rock and wrestling was pretty much well dead by 1992, but those last dated melodies were firmly cut off with an abrupt record scratch. Pro wrestling's future in the United States was wildly uncertain, as big names faded and national powers painfully contorted. Both the WWF and WCW went through some radical changes as they tried to adapt in the new world. Beneath them, the American independent scene saw the rise of two promising niche products in ECW and Smoky Mountain Wrestling, while things only began heating up around the globe, as international promotions set themselves up to become influential powers all their own. 1992 was a year of changing fortunes, cringeworthy revelations, bittersweet farewells, and a glimpse of what the future might hold. If the business could just keep from totally self-destructing, that is. This is Timeline 1992. January 3rd. The rough sledding begins with TV News magazine Inside Edition running a piece on Hulk Hogan, focusing on his past steroid use in light of his disastrous appearance on Arsenio Hall the previous year. In the feature, both superstar Billy Graham and Dr. D. David Schultz attest to Hogan's steroid use, with Graham claiming he'd personally injected Hogan himself. January 4th. 50,000 fans fill the Tokyo Dome to witness the second annual WCW New Japan Super Show, which will air on pay-per-view in condensed form in March. On the card, Riki Choshu defeats Tatsumi Fujinami to unify the IWGP Heavyweight title with the long-abandoned Greatest 18 Championship, while Lex Luger retains the WCW World title over Masahiro Chono. In the main event, Sting teams with the Great Muta to defeat the Steiner brothers. January 6th. After departing a house show in Peoria, Illinois, Nasty Boy Brian Knobbs is stabbed 4 times in the chest during an altercation with another group of motorists. Knobbs will miss the Royal Rumble 2 weeks later, but is incredibly back in action the week after that. January 10th. 65-year-old Ed the Sheik Farhat does a very rare submission job, losing to Atsushi Onita's Boston Crab during a barbed wire match before 4,200 fans at an FMW card in Matsudo. January 12th. One of the most famous and important turns in wrestling history is broadcast 6 weeks after it was filmed, as Shawn Michaels double-crosses Marty Jannetty on the set of Brutus Beefcake's Barbershop. Following several instances of dissension, Michaels feigns reconciliation with Jannetty, before super-kicking him and then launching him through the set's window, leaving Jannetty streaked in blood. Commentator Bobby Heenan points out an alternative theory, that Jannetty actually dove through the window in an attempt to escape. If true, what an act of cowardice. January 15th. WCW Executive Vice President Jim Herd resigns from the organization. Herd's tumultuous 3-year tenure, most infamous for his firing of then-world champion Ric Flair, ends after refusing to move to another department in Turner Syndication, and reportedly after losing a power struggle with Booker Dusty Rhodes. Herd is replaced by K. Allen Fry, who earns praise for his willingness to spend and for implementing a bonus system that rewards the harder working wrestlers. January 17th. Less than 48 hours before the Royal Rumble, Bret Hart loses the Intercontinental title to scheduled pay-per-view opponent The Mountie at a house show in Springfield, Massachusetts. It's later revealed that Hart had an apparent deal in place to jump to WCW and appear at that coming week's Clash of the Champions, only to realize that his Federation contract has rolled over for another year, thus keeping him in the WWF for the foreseeable future. January 18th. Joel Goodhart, promoter of the Philadelphia-based Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, announces on his local radio show that TWA is being shut down due to financial issues. TWA gained a cult following on the indie level for its ambitious quarterly supercards, featuring recognizable stars and a grittier product aimed toward adults, but is done in by excessive spending. In its place, one-time TWA financier Todd Gordon will start up ECW, then Eastern Championship Wrestling, the following month. January 19th. Reputed real-world champion Ric Flair wins the vacant WWF Championship at the 1992 Royal Rumble in Albany, after winning the titular bout as the number 3 draw. Both Flair's hour-long performance and associate Bobby Heenan's humorously desperate commentary put the 1992 match in the pantheon of greatest Rumbles ever. The finish of the Rumble sees erstwhile babyface Sid Justice eliminate Hulk Hogan to an enormous cheer, a concise portrait of the contemporary backlash toward aging, image-wounded Hulk. The WWF will go so far as to alter the crowd response and dub in new commentary when the elimination spot is aired on future TV broadcasts. The 17,000 fans at Albany's Knickerbocker Arena also witness Rowdy Roddy Piper, subbing in for Bret Hart, defeat the Mountie in mere minutes to win the IC title. It would be Piper's only championship win in the WWF until he briefly held Raw's tag titles with Flair in 2006. January 21st. A year and a half after leaving the WWF, Jesse the Body Ventura debuts as an announcer at WCW's latest Clash of the Champions in Topeka, Kansas. Notable from the card is Van Hammer having easily the best match of his career, losing to Cactus Jack in a Falls Count Anywhere match. January 25th. Marty Jannetty is arrested in Tampa following an altercation with police outside a nightclub. Jannetty's found to be in possession of less than a gram of cocaine and is also charged with resisting arrest with force. After being sentenced to 6 months of house arrest, Jannetty's planned match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 8 is cancelled. January 28th. Stan Hansen wins the All Japan Triple Crown for the 3rd time, ending the year-plus reign of Jumbo Tsuruta in front of 3,800 fans in the city of Chiba. February 7th. The Legion of Doom lose the WWF World Tag Team titles to the new team of Money Inc., Ted DiBiase and IRS, at a Friday night house show in Denver. The change is facilitated in part by Road Warrior Hawk failing his second drug test in less than 1 year. On the same date, renowned wrestling wildman Buzz Sawyer passes away from drug-induced heart failure at the age of 32. Sawyer was best known for his storied feud with Tommy Rich, culminating in 1983's last Battle of Atlanta inside a steel cage, as well as his prolific runs in territories like Dallas, Mid-South, and Mid-Atlantic, and short stints in both the WWF and WCW. Sawyer held numerous titles throughout the territories, including Tag Team Gold with brother Bret, as well as Matt Bourne. February 8th. Saturday night's main event airs on the Fox network for the first time. The main angle sees Sid Justice walk out on Hulk Hogan during a tag team match, setting up their showdown for WrestleMania 8. Elsewhere on the card, Macho Man Randy Savage defeats Jake the Snake Roberts to blow off their long feud. In a cliffhanger that pays off weeks later on television, Roberts attempts to ambush Savage and Miss Elizabeth with a chair backstage afterwards, but is stopped by The Undertaker, marking a face turn for the Phenom. On the same date, Kerry Von Erich is arrested at a drugstore in suburban Dallas after attempting to forge painkiller prescriptions. Von Erich is suspended from the WWF and enters rehab. February 12th. WWF Super WrestleMania for the SNES becomes the company's first 16-bit home release. Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage headline a colorful 10-man roster, though finishing moves and unique movesets are absent. A Sega Mega Drive version will be released later in the autumn, with 2 less wrestlers but finishers included. February 14th. Prior to a WWF house show in St. Louis, an unconfirmed number of federal agents and local police officers search the talent for drugs as they arrive at the venue. Nothing incriminating is discovered, as talent is reportedly tipped off ahead of time that a search is coming. February 17th. Jim the Anvil Neidhart is fired from the WWF, one day after refusing to take a drug test at a house show. Neidhart's firing briefly leaves new Foundation partner Owen Hart as a single, before he forms High Energy with Koko Beware later that spring. February 19th. Hawaiian-born Harold Watanabe, best known for playing Japanese villain Tojo Yamamoto across numerous southern territories for decades, dies from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at the age of 65, reportedly spurred by recent health struggles. The ruthless but undersized Yamamoto held countless championships in the Continental Territory, and was also renowned as a manager and trainer. Yamamoto's more famous proteges include Jerry and Jeff Jarrett, Sid Vicious, Bobby Eaton, and even Macho Man Randy Savage. February 23rd. The Ladies Professional Wrestling Association holds the first ever all-women's wrestling pay-per-view, Super Ladies Showdown, before 400 fans in Rochester, Minnesota. In the main event, Terry Power, aka future WWF performer Tori, wins the LPWA title from Lady X, while Harley Saito defeats Denise Storm in a tournament final to win the LPWA Japanese title. Unfortunately, LPWA ceases operations shortly after the event. February 25th. ECW holds its first ever event, Market Street Mayhem, at the Original Sports Bar in Philadelphia. 20-year-old future mainstay Stevie Richards competes in the undercard, while former WWF champion Ivan Koloff loses to local wrestler Tony Stetson. February 29th. WCW's second annual Super Brawl sees world champion Lex Luger drop the title to eternal frenemy Sting in the main event, before leaving the company to join Vince McMahon's World Bodybuilding Federation. No, really, that was a thing that happened. While the main event is pretty mundane, the 5,000 fans at the Milwaukee Auditorium witness a strong card otherwise. The event opens with Brian Pillman winning the WCW Light Heavyweight title from Jushin Thunder Liger in a Match of the Year candidate. Elsewhere, Rick Rude retains the United States title over Ricky the Dragon Steamboat after Paulie dangerously, disguised as a ninja, waffles Steamboat with his cellular phone. Bonus fact, there have only been 2 pay-per-views in US wrestling history to be held on Leap Day. This and AEW Revolution 2020, and only one man wrestled on both 28 years apart, Dustin Rhodes. March 1st. The third incarnation of Tiger Mask debuts at New Japan's 20th anniversary card in Yokohama. Played by the future 5-time junior heavyweight champion Koji Kanemoto, Tiger Mask 3 loses to El Samurai in his first outing. March 2nd. Backstage WWF staffers Pat Patterson and Terry Garvin resigned from the organization, following allegations of sexual misconduct levied by 2 former ring attendants, both of whom were underage at the time, as well as an ex-front office employee and former enhancement talent Barry Orton, brother of Bob and uncle of Randy. Major news outlets pick up on the escalating scandal, while Vince McMahon denies all of the charges. Around the same time, ring announcer Mel Phillips is suspended in conjunction with the scandal, before quietly leaving the WWF. March 4th. A new record 16,300 fans fill Tokyo's Budokan Hall for an All-Japan card headlined by Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Taue winning the PWF World Tag Team titles from the Miracle Violence connection of Steve Williams and Terry Gordy. In the semi-main, Stan Hansen retains the Triple Crown by defeating Mitsuharu Misawa. March 6th. Former WWF performer Paul Roma debuts inside the boxing ring, losing to opponent Jerry Aronson via 4th-round corner stoppage. Roma will only fight twice more, winning both fights, before returning to wrestling the following year. March 13th. In an attempt to defuse the mounting scandals surrounding the WWF's backstage culture, Vince McMahon appears on Larry King Live in opposition to Bruno Sammartino and Barry Orton. McMahon offers several untrue assertions during the appearance, chiefly that there's no truth to any of the allegations and that he knew nothing of the sexual abuse allegations before the media ran with them. March 16th. McMahon, Sammartino, and Orton take part in a legendarily disjointed gab session on Phil Donahue's talk show, along with superstar Billy Graham, former WWF broadcaster turned accuser Murray Hodgson, radio host John Arezzi, and Dave Meltzer himself. In attendance for the discussion is former ring attendant Tom Cole, who'd accused Terry Garvin and Mel Phillips of improprieties from when he was underage. Cole had just reached a settlement with the WWF and is planted in the audience so that, if need be, McMahon could point out Cole's friendly presence as a counter to any damning statements made by any panelist that might mention Cole's name. March 23rd. After nearly 15 years of broadcasts, the MSG network airs a live Madison Square Garden house show for the final time, outside of a one-off showing in 1997. A crowd of 9,000 is on hand at the Garden to witness former enemies Hulk Hogan and Rowdy Roddy Piper team up to defeat former Horseman allies Ric Flair and Sid Justice. March 31st. WCW runs northern New Jersey's Meadowlands for the final time, drawing 4,500 fans for an event headlined by Sting retaining his world title over Rick Rude. The WWF had stopped using the venue out of protest for the Meadowlands, allowing WCW to run the building. And with WCW out of the picture, the WWF will return to the Meadowlands in July. April 3rd. Former WWF referee Rita Chatterton appears on Geraldo Rivera's Now It Can Be Told, where she alleges misconduct on the part of Vince McMahon, specifically promises of star treatment and opportunities in exchange for sexual favors, citing a July 1986 encounter where she was allegedly coerced and then later fired for refusing further acts. Chatterton's story is corroborated by McMahon's former chauffeur, Jim Stewart. April 4th. WBF Body Stars, the television hub for Vince McMahon's World Bodybuilding Federation, premieres in a morning time slot on the USA Network. Hosted by Vince McMahon and two-time Ms. National Fitness Champion Cameo Newer, the program also features Lex Luger, fresh from World Championship Wrestling. By the early summer, low ratings will lead to Body Stars transitioning into a fitness lifestyle show centered around Newer, before being cancelled altogether. On the same date, WCW officially rebrands TBS's World Championship Wrestling broadcast, calling the repackaged show WCW Saturday Night. The remodeled program borrows elements from the WWF's Primetime Wrestling, featuring studio banter hosted by Jim Ross to act as bumpers between pre-recorded matches. April 5th. Despite the black clouds hanging over the organization, the WWF pulls off a mostly well-received WrestleMania 8, drawing over 62,000 fans, about 47,000 paid, to Indianapolis's Hoosier Dome. In what's largely stated to be his farewell match, Hulk Hogan defeats Sid Justice by disqualification following interference from Papa Shango. Making the save is Ultimate Warrior, returning 7 months after he was indefinitely suspended for holding up Vince McMahon for more money. 2 major title changes occur at WrestleMania. Earlier in the card, Bret Hart wins back the IC title by defeating Roddy Piper in a heated scrap in what turns out to be Piper's last match for several years. Meanwhile, Macho Man Randy Savage captures his second WWF Championship, defeating Ric Flair in a highly personal grudge match centered on Flair's assertion that he knew Miss Elizabeth before Savage did. Hogan and Piper aren't the only stars flying the WWF coop. The event is also notable for Jake the Snake Roberts securing his contractual release before going out to lose to The Undertaker. Roberts had wanted out of the company and reportedly refuses to wrestle unless his release is prepared. April 8th. The Dallas-backed Global Wrestling Federation makes major cuts amid financial peril, and the decision is made to only book local talent. Broadcaster and co-founder Joe Pedicino's let go, as is his wife, interviewer Bonnie Blackstone, as well as Booker/North American champion Eddie Gilbert. Incredibly, Gilbert wrestles 3 more matches for the promotion over the coming weeks, but never drops the belt and instead brings it to Memphis's USWA for an interpromotional feud that isn't actually an interpromotional feud. My head hurts. April 17th. Reigning Triple Crown champion Stan Hansen wins All Japan's annual Champion Carnival, defeating Mitsuharu Misawa in the finals. April 18th. WWF shortens the name of its Saturday morning Superstars of Wrestling show to just Superstars, following a trademark dispute with a promoter named Albert Patterson. The dispute persists as of the recording of this video, which explains why pre-April 1992 episodes of WWF Superstars of Wrestling are not available on the WWE network, and why all other footage from that era of Superstars has the classic Superstars logo blurred out. April 19th. The WWF draws 8,000 fans to the Sheffield Arena for UK Rampage, headlined by countryman Davey Boy Smith beating IRS. The event marks the final WWF appearance for Miss Elizabeth as she neutralizes old rival Sensational Sherry, while Macho Man Randy Savage retains his title over Shawn Michaels. Elizabeth and Savage will divorce later that summer, which the WWF and Savage subsequently acknowledged with a gracious statement in the company magazine. On the same date, Pro Wrestling Fujiwara Gumi holds an underwhelming spectacle before 9,600 fans in Tokyo, in which wrestler and mixed martial artist Masakatsu Funaki submits ex-boxing champion Roberto Duran in the third round of a mixed rules contest. Duran shows up out of shape and acts like the match means nothing, while Funaki later expresses disappointment in Duran's level of effort. April 20th. Jimmy Lennon, one of the most famed ring announcers in both boxing and wrestling, passes away from heart failure at the age of 79. The California-based Lennon was a fixture at LA's Olympic Auditorium throughout the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s, and his strong reputation was such that he was often flown to Japan for major boxing and wrestling bouts. Lennon made appearances in movies such as Raging Bull and Rocky III, while son Jimmy Jr. became a prolific boxing ring announcer in his own right. April 25th. Superfly Jimmy Snuka becomes the first ever ECW champion after defeating Wildman Sal Bellomo in a makeshift tournament final. One day later, Snuka drops the title to local wrestler Johnny Hotbody. April 26th. Less than a year after his debut with the company, Sid Justice walks out of the WWF, following a house show match with the Ultimate Warrior. Sid reportedly failed a drug test prior to WrestleMania 8 and is about to serve a 6-week suspension. That, combined with a distaste over his feud with Warrior, leads to Sid quitting. April 30th. IWGP Junior Heavyweight Champion Jushin Thunder Liger wins a 9-man Top of the Super Juniors tournament after defeating El Samurai in the finals. May 6th. One of the wildest looking spectacles in wrestling history takes place in Hyogo, Japan, where 5,000 fans witness Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto face Sabu and his uncle the Sheik in a barbed wire match where the wires are also set on fire. The Raging Inferno makes having any sort of match impossible, so the action is halted after just 4.5 minutes. The 65-year-old Sheik ends up requiring treatment for severe burns and smoke inhalation, but is somehow back in the ring just 3 weeks later. May 12th. WCW announces the hiring of former Mid-South owner and booker Cowboy Bill Watts as Vice President of Wrestling Operations, marking his return to the business after a 5-year absence. Though once an inspired showrunner with a keen touch for scripting gritty drama, Watts' stewardship of WCW will be marred by out-of-touch concepts, alienation of talent, and clashing with upper management. Watts gains a particular notoriety for laying down a series of archaic ground rules for the wrestlers, including banning top rope maneuvers and prohibiting faces and heels from fraternizing in public. On the same date, Lenny Montana, a former wrestler best known for playing enforcer Luca Brasi in The Godfather, passes away from a heart attack at the age of 66. Over a 2-decade career, the 6'6" Montana held gold in the AWA, as well as in NWA territories like Georgia, Southwest, and Central States before transitioning into acting full-time. May 15th. CMLL booker Antonio Peña breaks away from the organization to form Asistencia Asesoría y Administración, or AAA. Top attraction Conan joins Peña, as do many of CMLL's more dynamic upstarts. One of AAA's early sensations is 17-year-old Rey Mysterio Jr., who's performing daredevil maneuvers that most wrestlers wouldn't dare trying, which still rings true decades later. May 16th. Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling comes to the United States, partnering with World Wrestling Association for a joint effort before an impressive 8,100 fans in Los Angeles. In the main event, Atsushi Onita, El Hijo del Santo, and Tarzan Goto win a well-received 2 out of 3 falls match over Horace Boulder, Negro Casas, and Tim Patterson. On the same date, the WWF airs a very dubious angle in which Papa Shango puts a curse on the Ultimate Warrior, resulting in Warrior puking up a lovely pea soup applesauce concoction in the locker room. May 17th. WCW Wrestle War takes place before 6,000 fans in Jacksonville. The event is headlined with what many consider to be the greatest War Games match of all time, as Sting captains a 5-man unit to victory over Paul E. Dangerously's Dangerous Alliance. The end comes as the result of a miscue when the Alliance's Larry Zbyszko accidentally batters teammate Bobby Eaton's arm with a piece of metal rigging, allowing for Sting to swoop in and get the submission win. Elsewhere on the card, Brian Pillman retains his light heavyweight title over former partner Tom Zenk, while tag champs the Steiner brothers defeat Takayuki Iizuka and Tatsumi Fujinami. May 18th. After leaving WCW days earlier, Scott Hall performs at the WWF's Wrestling Challenge tapings as Razor Ramon for the first time, defeating local wrestler Chris Hahn in a dark match. Following numerous vignettes over the summer, Razor's televised in-ring debut will air in August. May 22nd. Brian Lee becomes Smoky Mountain Wrestling's first heavyweight champion after defeating Buddy Landel, Tony Anthony, and Paul Orndorff in succession to win a one-night tournament at Volunteer Slam in Knoxville. On the same date, the GWF formally strips Eddie Gilbert of the North American Championship. Scott Putski becomes champion a week later, though Gilbert continues to defend his version of the belt in the USWA. May 23rd. On or around this date, the WWF confirms that SummerSlam will take place at London's Wembley Stadium. Previously, the WWF planned on holding the event in the Washington, D.C. area stateside. Because of the time difference, SummerSlam will take place on a Saturday before airing in the US in its then usual Monday night slot. May 25th. 1 week after competing at WCW's Wrestle War, Tatsumi Fujinami makes a random appearance at an ECW Memorial Day show in Philadelphia, choking out a wrestler called The Bouncer. Fujinami's appearance is part of a New Japan angle where the aging star is working his way back into top fighting form. May 27th. Weeks after Bill Watts' hiring, K. Allen Fry quits WCW after refusing a transfer to another part of Turner's organization. With Fry gone, Jim Ross ascends to the number 2 role in the hierarchy, answering to Watts, his longtime friend and mentor. May 30th. Portland wrestling promoter Don Owen calls it quits after 50 years running the territory that his father Herb founded all the way back in 1925. Drastically dwindling attendance and the loss of television force Owen to close the door on Portland, though promoter Sandy Barr will try to pick up the pieces with his own group in the area. June 5th. All Japan sells out Budokan Hall to the tune of 16,300 once again as Stan Hansen retains the Triple Crown over Toshiaki Kawada. Business is booming for All Japan to such a degree that the next Budokan card for late August nearly sells out when it was announced that night, without any names being advertised. June 8th. Days before he's scheduled to appear at the WBF's pay-per-view, Lex Luger is badly injured in a motorcycle accident in Atlanta, the most significant injury being a crushed elbow. On the same date, USWA champion Jerry Lawler defeats Eddie Gilbert at Memphis' Mid-South Coliseum to unify the USWA and GWF North American belts. June 13th. The WBF stages its only pay-per-view ever from Long Beach, California. Doing a paltry 3,000 pay-per-view buys, the competition is won by 1991 winner Gary Stridham. Most of the competitors are noticeably leaner than they were in 1991 due to stricter drug testing. June 16th. WCW's latest Clash of the Champions is taped to air 6 nights later, as opposed to the norm of airing live, before 4,600 fans in Charleston, South Carolina. The broadcast features the opening round of an international tournament to crown new NWA World Tag Team Champions, as well as a quarter-final bout in which Steve Williams and Terry Gordy beat the Steiner brothers. June 17th. Though the WWF will claim SummerSlam at Wembley completely sold out the day tickets went on sale, they actually sell a nonetheless impressive 65,000 tickets within the first 6 hours or so. June 19th. Genichiro Tenryu's Super World of Sports promotion holds its final show in Nagasaki. The group, which had been affiliated with the WWF over the preceding year plus, splits into factions, with Tenryu forming a new promotion called WAR from Some of the Ashes. On the same date, Herb Abrams' UWF holds its first card in 7 months, a 21-match TV taping before just under 1,000 fans in Spartanburg, South Carolina. It will be the only event that the UWF holds in 1992. June 20th. WCW holds its first ever beach blast before 5,000 fans in Mobile, Alabama. Highlights include World Champion Sting defeating Cactus Jack in a non-title Falls Count Anywhere match, and Ricky Steamboat outlasting US Champion Rick Rude in a non-title 30-minute Iron Man match. In actual title matches, Scotty Flamingo, that's Raven as a plucky surfer, wins the light heavyweight title from Brian Pillman, while tag champs the Steiner brothers draw Terry Gordy and Steve Williams. June 26th. Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, one of the biggest pro wrestling stars of the early television era, passes away at the age of 71 after suffering multiple strokes. The prototype of the arrogant but tough villains that would follow for generations to come, Rogers was an immense box office draw throughout the 50s and early 60s. He became NWA World Champion in June 1961 after defeating Pat O'Connor in Chicago. A year and a half later, following a split between the New York faction and the NWA, Rogers became the first champion of what is today WWE, formerly recognized as title holder in April 1963. As of this video, Rogers is just one of 3 men to have held both the NWA and WWE World titles, joined by Ric Flair and AJ Styles. In addition to becoming one of the business's first unambiguous heels, Rogers helped usher in a working style that put more emphasis on showier maneuvers as opposed to relying heavily on groundwork. Rogers was also the wrestler that greatly popularized the figure 4 leg lock. June 27th. The Legion of Doom and manager Paul Ellering introduce a new part of their act. Rocco, a ventriloquist dummy that had apparently served as inspiration for Animal and Hawk in their youth. These aren't exactly banner days for the Road Warriors. June 29th. One of the last great Memphis feuds reaches a fever pitch at the Mid-South Coliseum as Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett team up to win the USWA Tag Team titles from the barbaric Moondogs in a steel cage match. The two teams will exchange the belts off and on in various gimmick matches into October, helping justify Lawler and Jarrett versus the Moondogs winning PWI's Feud of the Year for 1992. July 1st. More than 8 years after last wrestling for the WWF, former world champion Bob Backlund returns to the company at age 42, defeating Skinner at a house show in White Plains, New York. On the same date, Stan Frazier, best known for his mid-80s run in the WWF as Uncle Elmer, passes away from kidney failure, aged 54. The super heavyweight Frazier used many gimmicks and names in his 3-decade career, including Plowboy Frazier, The Convict, and was even a knockoff Kamala. Yes, really. But Frazier gained his most fame as Uncle Elmer, wrestling as part of Hillbilly Jim's group of fun-loving country folk. Elmer was legitimately wed to his wife Joyce in a well-remembered wedding on an early episode of Saturday Night's Main Event. July 4th. AAA runs in the United States for the first time, drawing an impressive 6,500 fans to Cal State University in Los Angeles. On the card, Konnan defeats El Kabade in a best-of-3 falls hair versus hair match. July 5th. A heavily promoted WCW house show at Atlanta's Omni sees 2 title changes, as Brad Armstrong wins the light heavyweight title from Scotty Flamingo, and Steve Williams and Terry Gordy beat the Steiners to win the World Tag Team titles. Despite Bill Watts ordering a big push for the house show on television, only 2,500 fans attend. July 12th. WCW's Great American Bash in Albany, Georgia sees Big Van Vader defeat Sting in a classic David vs. Goliath match to win the world title. With the win, Vader can claim to have won world titles in 4 different countries, they being the US, Japan, Mexico, and Austria. The crowd of 8,000 at the Bash also witnessed the conclusion of the NWA World Tag Team Title Tournament, as WCW titleists Steve Williams and Terry Gordy defeat Barry Windham and Dustin Rhodes in a rather lethargic tournament final. July 15th. 1 month after their lone pay-per-view event, Vince McMahon informs Ben and Joe Weider of the International Federation of Bodybuilders that he is disbanding the WBF. July 18th. 7 years after the 1985 Great American Bash Tour drew 27,000 fans to the venue, WCW runs Charlotte's Memorial Stadium for a Saturday night house show. It only draws 2,200 fans. July 20th. Natural disasters, earthquake, and typhoon capture the only titles of their WWF runs, winning the tag team belts from Money Inc. at a Superstars taping in Worcester, Massachusetts. The title swap never airs on TV and is relegated to a home video release. That's just how the WWF rolled in 1992. July 21st. The WWF holds its first ever ladder match as IC champion Bret Hart defeats Shawn Michaels in an untelevised trial at the Wrestling Challenge tapings in Portland, Maine. At the same tapings, super heavyweight wrestler The Great Coquina appears in an untelevised interview segment alongside manager Alpha. Coquina will be repackaged before his televised debut in October when he becomes the mighty Yokozuna, managed by Mr. Fuji. July 27th. The Rock and Roll Express reunite after a 2-year absence to take on Eddie and Doug Gilbert at a USWA card at the Mid-South Coliseum. A reported 2,500 fans attend, the USWA's largest crowd since 1990. July 31st. 1 year after Hulk Hogan's disastrous appearance on the show, WWF champion Macho Man Randy Savage sits down with Arsenio Hall, where the topic of steroids comes up. Savage claims he didn't use them, but had merely experimented with them. It wasn't as catastrophic as Hogan's sit-down, but really, the damage had already been done at this point. August 2nd. Ron Simmons defeats Big Van Vader to become WCW World Heavyweight Champion in Baltimore as part of an angle where Simmons earns a title shot through a random lottery involving several other babyface wrestlers. Today, WWE recognizes Simmons as the first African-American world champion in wrestling history, though Bobo Brazil does hold a legitimate claim to that distinction. The lottery comes about when intended challenger Sting is attacked earlier in the night by a debuting Jake the Snake Roberts, who DDTs Sting twice onto a steel chair. August 9th. As part of a new working relationship between the WWF and USWA, Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett appear front row ringside for a WWF house show in Memphis. During the card, Jarrett issues an open challenge to any WWF wrestler, which is accepted by Intercontinental Champion Bret Hart, who promises to defend his title against Jarrett the next time the WWF rolls through Memphis, provided he retains his title at SummerSlam, of course. August 10th. On or around this date, the WWF and Conan part ways, after more than a year of the two sides trying to work out the kinks of a high-flying spaceman character for Conan. The role is given to lower carder Paul Diamond, who subsequently brings the character to television as Max Moon. August 12th. Masahiro Chono wins the second of his eventual 5 G1 Climax tournaments, after defeating ravishing Rick Rude in the finals. In addition to winning the tournament, Chono also wins the vacant NWA World title. August 15th. All Japan Women plays host to a uniquely emotional scene as IWA World Champion Manami Toyota defeats friend and former partner Toshio Yamada in a hair versus hair match. Post-match, Toyota has a change of heart and tries to stop the barber from cutting her friend's hair before having to be restrained, and can only watch with tearful regret as Yamada has her head shaved. August 16th. The Great Muta wins the IWGP Heavyweight title for the first time, defeating Riki Choshu before 9,000 fans in Fukuoka. August 22nd. Mitsuharu Misawa defeats Stan Hansen in Tokyo to become All Japan Triple Crown champion for the first time. The win cements Misawa as All Japan's ace and makes him the first of the 4 Pillars of Heaven to capture the top prize. August 24th. On or around this date, Pat Patterson returns to his old position as Vince McMahon's right-hand man in the WWF, after the fervor surrounding the accusations against him, specifically from short-lived ring announcer Murray Hodgson, died down. August 29th. A reported 80,000 plus fans fill Wembley Stadium for the 5th annual SummerSlam, to the tune of over $3.6 million in revenue. In the main event, Davey Boy Smith defeats brother-in-law Bret Hart to win the IC title in an instant classic. The match is notable for Hart reportedly having to carry Bulldog all the way through, due to a demon-addled Smith blanking on the layout just after the match began. Earlier in the card, the Ultimate Warrior defeats WWF champion Macho Man Randy Savage via countout, following interference from both Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect. For weeks building up to SummerSlam, Perfect strongly implies that one of the participants has sold out to his managerial services, creating paranoia between the two unstable babyfaces. In the end, neither man sells out, as it was all a ruse from Flair and Perfect to weaken both rivals. Elsewhere, The Undertaker defeats Kamala by disqualification, while Shawn Michaels and Rick Martel fight to a double countout in a match where both pretty boys vow not to hit each other in the face, which they renege on, much to sensational Sherry's chagrin. Also, the Legion of Doom beat Money Inc. in a match where Hawk is noticeably lethargic. That leads to August 30th. Road Warrior Hawk quits the WWF in apparent anticipation of another failed drug test. A defiant Hawk allegedly pops several sedatives before the SummerSlam match and is in no condition to work. Hawk's quitting puts a strain on his friendship with Animal, who stays behind in the WWF and is just as shocked as anyone that Hawk decides to leave. September 1st. Ric Flair regains the WWF Championship from Randy Savage at a Superstars taping in Hershey, Pennsylvania. The match is actually done twice at the taping, as the first outing abruptly ends without reason at the behest of an irritated Vince McMahon, due to Flair reportedly ignoring McMahon's layout for the match. September 2nd. WCW's 20th Clash of the Champions emanates from Atlanta, and also marks the 20-year anniversary of pro wrestling debuting on TBS. A number of legends are on hand for the occasion, including Andre the Giant in his final TV appearance. On the card, Ron Simmons retains his world title over Cactus Jack, while Ricky Steamboat defeats Steve Austin in a no disqualification match to capture the television title. September 5th. At a WCW house show at Dallas's Sportatorium, an elderly fan attempts to shoot Jake the Snake Roberts. The fan is apparently a regular at Dallas events for years and had never before caused an issue. Thankfully, nobody is hurt in the incident. September 15th. The WWF and Genichiro Tenryu's WAR promotion hold a joint card before 12,000 fans in Yokohama. In the main event, Ric Flair draws Tenryu in a 2 out of 3 falls match that lasts over 38 minutes. On the same date, Butch Reed is fired from WCW just weeks after returning to the company due to no-shows. Reed was part of an angle with former Doom partner and now world champion Ron Simmons during his brief time back. September 17th. Former Olympic wrestler Jun Akiyama makes his professional debut, losing to Kenta Kobashi at an All Japan card. Even at the time, Akiyama was being earmarked for a major push, and indeed, he'd eventually hold the Triple Crown twice, among many other All Japan accolades. September 19th. FMW draws 30,000 to Yokohama Stadium for their 3rd anniversary show. In the main event, Atsushi Onita wins the WWA Martial Arts title from Tiger Jeet Singh in an exploding barbed wire death match. September 23rd. During an NWA World title bout in Morioka, Japan, champion Masahiro Chono jams his neck after a tombstone spot gone wrong at the hands of Steve Austin. And yes, many who remember this moment would note the irony of Austin's involvement. September 24th. Roy Heffernan, one of the influential Australian duo of the Fabulous Kangaroos, passes away from a heart attack aged 67. Heffernan and partner Al Costello, known for their bush hats and their brandishing of boomerangs, were credited with popularizing tag team wrestling in the 50s and 60s, and held gold across numerous territories. In 2003, Heffernan, along with Costello, were posthumously the first tag team inducted into the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame. On the same date, Roy Shire, the longtime promoter of San Francisco's big-time wrestling, passes away from a pair of heart attacks suffered days earlier, aged 70. A former wrestler alongside kayfabe brother Ray, Shire turned to promoting and ran San Francisco from the early 60s to the early 80s, drawing large crowds for supercards at the Cow Palace. September 30th. In a throwback for fans of the Northeast region, ECW champion Jimmy Snuka drops the title to old WWF rival Don Morocco at a card in Philadelphia. October 1st. On 6 counts of forging drug prescriptions, Kerry Von Erich receives a 10-year suspended sentence, 10 years probation, and $6,000 in fines. October 5th. Scott Steiner wrestles his last match for WCW before the expiration of his contract. This follows both a blow-up with Bill Watts and a failed negotiation on a new deal, with brother Rick following Scott out of the door. The problem is that Scott just won the television title from Ricky Steamboat the previous week, so the belt has to be vacated. October 10th. With his full-time wrestling days behind him, Sergeant Slaughter appears as an on-screen official in the WWF for the first time. In terms of involvement, the role puts Slaughter in between the distant and periodic rulings of Jack Tunney and the grotesquely meddlesome style of future brand GMs. October 12th. In what virtually amounts to a last-minute decision, Bret Hart wins the WWF title for the first time, defeating Ric Flair via the sharpshooter at a Superstars taping in Saskatoon. Hart isn't even told about his big win until he arrives at the tapings earlier in the day. The 26-minute match never airs on television, but is included on future Coliseum video releases. Sometime close to this date, Ric Flair gives notice that he's leaving to return to WCW. Per Hart's recollection, Flair gave notice shortly after dropping the belt, while other sources have it later on down the line. At the same tapings, Marty Jannetty returns to the WWF, jumping the rail and attacking Shawn Michaels before a jobber squash. Jannetty goes to smash Michaels with his vanity mirror, only for Michaels to pull sensational Sherry into the oncoming path to take the blow. On the same date, Brian Lee bleeds buckets at an SMW taping after a debuting Kevin Sullivan kicks his hand while he's in the midst of blading, thus causing the blade to get stuck in Lee's forehead. Yeah, that'll make a mess. October 17th. Steve Austin and Brian Pillman teamed together for the first time at a house show in St. Paul, Minnesota, defeating Shane Douglas and Brad Armstrong. Though this was a mere random pairing, in a few months' time, Austin and Pillman will officially come together as the Transcendent Hollywood Blondes. October 21st. Riki Choshu and Shinya Hashimoto win New Japan's Super Grade Tag League, a 7-team round robin, after defeating Hiroshi Hase and Kensuke Sasaki in the finals. On the same date, All Japan commemorates their 20-year anniversary with their 100th consecutive Tokyo sellout, drawing over 16,000 fans to Budokan Hall. In the main event, Triple Crown champion Mitsuharu Misawa retains the gold over fellow pillar Toshiaki Kawada in a half-hour battle. October 25th. Bill Watts' directionless WCW tenure hits a new rock bottom with Halloween Havoc, an abysmal card in front of 7,000 fans at the Philadelphia Civic Center. Following a decent enough undercard, highlighted by Medusa beating the crap out of former boss Paulie dangerously after one misogynistic remark too many, Rick Rude and Masahiro Chono go to a non-finish in an atrociously slow rest-hold-filled NWA World Title match. That's followed up by Ron Simmons beating the Barbarian in a lackluster WCW title bout, then Sting defeating Jake Roberts in a match where the stipulation is decided by a ghoulish game show wheel. Sadly, the wheel lands on the most boring stipulation possible, a coal miner's glove match. The underwhelming match ends with Jake being bitten in the face by his own cobra, which basically sums up how it feels watching the show at home. On the bright side, Havoc is WCW's most bought pay-per-view in over 2 years on the strength of the Sting Roberts hype. Sadly, those curious fans had to watch that show. October 26th. The Mountie quits the WWF after losing an untelevised match to WWF champion Bret Hart in barely over 1 minute. October 27th. Shawn Michaels captures the first official championship of his WWF tenure, pinning Davey Boy Smith at a Saturday night's main event taping in Terre Haute, Indiana to win the Intercontinental title. On the same date, Big Van Vader badly injures enhancement talent Joe Thurman during a handicap match in Augusta, Georgia. Vader folds up Thurman with his trademark powerbomb, legitimately breaking Thurman's back and causing temporary paralysis. Though Thurman will ultimately walk again, the injury ends his wrestling career, and the accident reportedly haunts a remorseful Vader for a long time. October 30th. After departing the WWF over the summer, Kerry Von Erich returns to his old Dallas stomping grounds, making the save for Al Perez at a Sportatorium card. October 31st. Appropriately for Halloween Day, Doink the Clown makes his first televised appearance in the WWF. The face-painted Matt Bourne is seen cavorting in the crowd during a Tatanka squash match on Superstars. November 7th. A mere 3 months after his dramatic debut, Jake Roberts is fired from WCW after missing several dates. He also checks into the Betty Ford Clinic to address his personal issues. November 8th. Nikita Koloff wrestles the final match of his career, losing to Big Van Vader at a house show in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Koloff's retirement is due in part to effects of a herniated disc in his neck. The Russian Nightmare will subsequently enter the ministry after becoming a born-again Christian the following year. November 14th. Saturday night's main event airs for the second and final time on Fox, marking the program's last overall broadcast until 2006. In the main event, Bret Hart retains his WWF Championship over Papa Shango. November 16th. On or around this date, both the Ultimate Warrior and Davey Boy Smith are fired from the WWF after both men are reportedly found to be receiving shipments of growth hormone from the UK. Warrior was scheduled to team with Randy Savage to face Ric Flair and Razor Ramon at Survivor Series, while the British Bulldog was already in limbo after scheduled pay-per-view opponent The Mountie quit weeks earlier. On the November 16th episode of Primetime, a hasty angle plays out in which largely inactive show panelist Mr. Perfect accepts an offer from Savage to be his new partner at Survivor Series, thus turning him face and pitting him against associate Flair. Perfect's acceptance comes after Bobby Heenan tries to cut in and refuse the offer on Perfect's behalf, which offends the former Intercontinental Champion. An irate Heenan then strikes Perfect, upon which Perfect humiliates him. That same night, the Sandman becomes ECW Champion for the first of 5 times, defeating Don Morocco in Philadelphia. November 18th. An eventful Clash of the Champions takes place in Macon, Georgia, where Barry Windham turns on partner Dustin Rhodes after the two lose the tag titles to Shane Douglas and Ricky Steamboat. In a deliciously farcical boxing match, Scotty Flamingo knocks out Johnny B. Bad with the aid of a loaded glove. Meanwhile, Medusa goes to a draw with Paulie dangerously in an intergender contest, while Too Cold Scorpio makes his WCW debut as partner to Ron Simmons, and quickly astonishes the audience with his patented 450 splash. November 20th. During a trios match for CMLL, UWA champion El Canek becomes annoyed by the crowd favoring outside star Haku. So he attempts to... Hang on, let me see if I got this right. Shoot on Haku. It does not go well for El Canek. Fortunately, Haku has mercy on the legendary luchador, and instead of eating him in 3 bites, he just laughs off Kanek's meager onslaught. November 22nd. Ultimo Dragon makes his New Japan debut at Sumo Hall, immediately winning the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title from El Samurai. November 23rd. The following day at Sumo Hall, 2 other major names arrive in New Japan. One is longtime All Japan star Genichiro Tenryu, who takes part in a 6-man main event, and then issues a challenge to both Riki Choshu and Antonio Inoki. The other arrival is Road Warrior Hawk, who forms a Road Warriors offshoot called the Hellraisers with Kensuke Sasaki, who dons his own face paint to become Power Warrior. November 25th. The 6th annual Survivor Series takes place before 18,000 fans at the Coliseum in Richfield, Ohio, location of the first 2 Survivor Series events in the 80s. However, the elimination match format is mostly scrapped in favor of a pretty standard card, culminating in Bret Hart retaining the WWF title over IC champion Shawn Michaels. Elsewhere, Macho Man Randy Savage and the freshly turned Mr. Perfect defeat Ric Flair and Razor Ramon via disqualification. On the same date, Freddie Miller, longtime Atlanta area broadcaster known for his time in Georgia Championship Wrestling, passes away from a heart attack, aged 63. Miller co-hosted the Georgia program with Gordon Soley and is perhaps best known for being the man to hand off the microphone to Vince McMahon on Black Saturday in 1984. In later years, Miller did voiceovers for WCW programs, specifically announcing house show lineups. November 27th. After falling out with CMLL over money, Eddie Guerrero debuts for AAA as masked character Mascara Magica, but becomes one of the few wrestlers to voluntarily unmask, doing so before his scheduled match. After his victory, Guerrero runs down CMLL in a promo. December 4th. Mitsuharu Misawa and Toshiaki Kawada become All Japan Pro Wrestling World Tag Team Champions by winning the 1992 Real World Tag League, after defeating Akira Taue and Jun Akiyama in the finals. The same card in Tokyo hosts the final match for Andre the Giant, who teams with Giant Baba and Rusha Kimura in 6-man action. December 12th. Jerry Lawler makes his television debut for the WWF, replacing Mr. Perfect as color commentator on Superstars. December 14th. At a WWF TV taping in Green Bay, Wisconsin, mid-card heel Nails physically attacks Vince McMahon during a backstage dispute, reportedly knocking McMahon out of his chair and choking him till he's pulled away by several officials. Nails is of course fired, but later brings legal action against McMahon and the WWF, claiming the boss had sexually assaulted him, thus prompting Nails to react violently. On the same tapings, the Steiner brothers debut for the WWF, winning a squash match that will air on TV in January. Over in New Japan, the Hellraisers win the IWGP Tag Team titles from Scott Norton and Tony Hallomer in Osaka. With the win, Hawk becomes the only man to hold the WWF, NWA, AWA, All Japan, and IWGP Tag Team titles, whereas Animal can claim all except the IWGP. On the same show, the Great Muta hits a legendary gusher during a match with Hiroshi Hase. While perhaps tame by modern standards, Muta's blood loss, which leaves stains all over the ring and ringside areas, is such that it inspires an unofficial Muta scale in which future blade jobs are measured against Keiji Muto's spillage. Oh, and Muta wins the match, by the way. December 21st. Glenn Jacobs wrestles in USWA as a red and green tinsel-adorned nightmare called the Christmas Creature. If only USWA had had the foresight to call him Candy Cane. December 25th. Super Fire Pro Wrestling 2 is released for the Super Famicom in Japan. The game features over 24 wrestlers, as well as the birth of the critical feature, giving players the satisfaction of rendering their opponent motionless by concussing them and/or breaking their neck with a well-executed finisher. December 27th. WCW films an angle where Eric Watts, Bill's comically overpushed novice son, beats up Arn Anderson at a gas station in an attempt to give him some edge. Because nothing says edge like locking someone in an STF during a parking lot dust-up. December 28th. Starrcade draws 8,000 fans to Atlanta's Omni for what turns out to be a 2-match show. Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas retaining their tag belts over Barry Windham and Brian Pillman, and Sting defeating Big Van Vader to win the long-forgotten King of Cable tournament. The rest of the card is mostly a slog, specifically the streamlined second attempt at Battle Bowl. The Great Muta ultimately wins a competition that's most notable for Eric Watts throwing a famously laughable dropkick at Steve Williams during the tag team portion. December 30th. Big Van Vader regains the WCW World title from Ron Simmons at a house show in Baltimore. The title change was supposed to take place at another house show in Philadelphia the previous day, with WCW having TV cameras flown in to film the switch. But Simmons no-showed the event. And that was Timeline 1992. Are there any more years you'd like us to cover? Let us know in the comments below.